Hello, my name is Tim Shoebridge for Cherry Audio, and today I'm very excited to be able to walk you through their latest product and to showcase some of the sounds that it is capable of. So here it is, it's the Cherry Rhythm CR-78, and as you can see it looks really beautiful. It's a highly detailed DSP emulation of a legendary drum machine, the Roland CR-78, which was released all the way back in 1978. You see, there's a clue in the name. Now, it is a legendary drum machine, and it was responsible for so many legendary and iconic pop songs in the late 1970s and into the early 1980s. So what I thought might be fun in this video is to play you a few of the rhythm presets from the CR-78 and see if you can guess which iconic pop songs used those rhythms. It might be a bit tricky with copyright strikes, but we'll see how that goes. But in the meantime, let's get stuck in. Let's look at the main user interface and the main controls on the CR-78. Right, glasses on, let's get stuck in. Now, this view of the CR-78 with the control layout here is very familiar, isn't it? If you know what a Roland CR-78 looks like. But there are actually three different views, three different panel modes as they're called, and they're controlled by these three buttons up here on the top right hand side. This is the main view. I'll just give you a quick look at the other two views, which I will cover in detail later on in the video. We've got a voice edit mode. Now remember that this is a DSP emulation of the sounds of the original CR-78. It's not based on samples, and because it's a DSP emulation, we have got control over the sound that you wouldn't have if they were just samples. And so here you can see for every single instrument in the drum machine, Cherry Audio have given us a lot of control over that sound. As I said, I'll cover this later on in the video, but I just wanted you to be aware of it. It's one of the modes that you can get at when you're looking at the drum machine. The third mode is called Effects/Mixer. I'll cover this a little bit later on as well, but as you can see there's a mixer along the bottom here for every single instrument, so you can really refine the sound of your mix. There's a whole load of effects that you can apply on a per instrument basis, and then we've got some global effects down the right hand side. Again, I'll cover that later on in the video. Let's go back to the main panel mode, and I'll just cover the sort of the main controls that we've got here. Now obviously we've got these little buttons down the bottom here, these different colored buttons. These represent the different preset rhythms that were available on the CR-78. There are 17 different buttons here, excluding these cancel buttons on the right hand side. So that's 17 different presets. However, every preset has got two variations or two rhythms. We've got rhythm A and rhythm B, so that makes 34 in total. Let me just give you an example. So this is Rock 4. Sounds like a cheese, doesn't it? This is Rock 4. This is what it sounds like. So this is rhythm variation A, and if I switch to B, that's my variation. Back to A, and you'll notice when I switch between them that the switching takes place at the right point in time. Which is very cool. Now, one thing that owners of the original CR-78 found out when they started playing around with their drum machines is that you could actually hold down more than one of these buttons at the same time. You can hold down two buttons at the same time, and that gives you some more variations in the presets. So we've just heard Rock 4. Let's try Bossa Nova. So what if we were to combine Bossa Nova with Rock 4? The way you do that is to hold down the Shift button on your keyboard and then click. So we're listening to Bossa Nova. Let's add Rock 4 in. And now we get another variation. So that gives us a whole load more variations. I can't off the top of my head tell you how many there is. I'll do the maths and I'll put it up on the screen. But we have all of these variations to play with in terms of just the factory preset rhythms. Now, talking of factory preset rhythms and talking of variations of them, we've got this section here over on the left side to add variations to whatever we've chosen. First of all, let's talk about this little switch here, auto manual. Manual means we'll get the variation in the rhythm when we click on this button. Auto we'll cover in a second. Now, what variation is applied is controlled by this dial at the top here. Off means no variation at all. This means switch between the rhythms. So play rhythm A, then play rhythm B, then back to rhythm A, etc. This just gives a break, just silence, and then here we have a bunch of different variations. I'm not going to go through them all because they vary for each of the presets, but I'll give you a little bit of an example here. So let's go with just number 1, and let's play Rock 4 again. And then when I hit this button, we'll get a variation kick in. That wasn't very exciting, was it? Let's try something else. How about SD rolling? So this is a snare drum doing a roll. So again, you see when I click the button, it doesn't happen immediately. It happens at the right time when the measure finishes. So talking of measures, if we want to have that happening automatically and not have to click on the button, then that's what this switching to auto does. And then how often that variation, that fill is applied, is dependent on this control here, which counts how many measures before the fill is added. So let's switch it to auto. So actually just with the presets on their own, we've got a whole load of variation, a load of different variations of these different rhythms to play around with. But if we want to actually sculpt our own rhythms from scratch, then we've got this programmer section here. I'll cover that bit next, but there's just a few little things that I just want to cover off here on the front panel. They're very, very obvious. We have here this section. We have controlling of the tempo. So I'm running CR-78 here as a plugin in my DAW, and I've got host sync switched on. So I'm running at the moment at 120 BPM in my DAW, and that's the speed that it's playing at. And when you are syncing to your host, then this tempo gives you multiples of that tempo. So if I hover over it, it'll tell me that's 2 times the tempo, 4 times the tempo, half tempo, quarter tempo. But if I'm not syncing to my DAW, I turn sync off. Now this is a fully manual control of the BPM. Fairly obvious stuff. We've also got controls here to apply an accent, which is just basically a loudening of the sound. Now, when the accent plays is dependent on the preset. If I turn it up really loud, you'll hear it. Obviously, we can turn that off if we don't want it. By default, it's at 12 o'clock. And we've also got over here on the right hand side some controls for fading the rhythm in and out, and this was for, obviously for live performance. If I stop it and I put these to, we got 2 options, short and long, but if I switch to a long fade in and a long fade out, then when I click on this start button, it fades in nicely, and then when I stop it, I get a lovely little fade out as well. So yeah, that's a nice live performance option. We've got swing control for various amounts of swing, but pretty much that's it for the front panel. But let's get on to the programmer section next. But first of all, let's have a little bit of fun and let's guess the iconic pop song that used one of these presets. Right, let's have our first little bit of fun. See if you can guess the incredibly iconic song from the very early 1980s that used a wonderful, if not very, very slightly cheesy Roland preset rhythm and the sounds of the CR-78. I don't know whether it actually was the CR-78 that was used on this record, but it's that kind of era, so it might well have been. It might well have been a very, very slightly different drum machine. Doesn't matter. Because we can replicate those sounds with the CR-78. You can see here just about I've got the Rock 1 preset. That's all we're going to play is the Rock 1 preset, the very first preset in the list, and the variation is Rhythm A. All I've done really is I've gone into the effects mixer section and I've just added a little bit of EQ. I've just turned it down, taken away the top end of it to give it a bit more of an old retro feel. But let's just listen to this Rock 1 preset. It sounds like this. Yep, that's it. Ever so slightly cheesy. So simple, right? So simple. But it's the beginning and the inspiration for what I think is an incredibly wonderful song. Now there's some chords that go with it. I'm going to try and not get any copyright strikes here. The chords that go with it, well, there's the first two, the opening two. You must be able to guess it with the opening two. It goes like this. And then there's a... I'm not going to play anymore. I'm going to play you what I've recorded, which is a little variation on that. There is, of course, before we get to those chords, a funky bass line. Sounds like this. Here we go. Okay, let's talk about programming. Now, the CR-78 from Cherry Audio, it's a virtual instrument, and like any virtual instrument, you can just play it. I could play it from my MIDI controller keyboard, or from any other MIDI controller or sequencer, and if I've got it hosted in my DAW, then I can send it MIDI data from my DAW and play it that way. However, it's really convenient to be able to program patterns inside the drum machine itself, and that's what I'm going to show you. Now, the original Roland CR-78 was famous for being a programmable drum machine. However, out of the box, you couldn't program it. You needed an accessory, a rather archaic looking accessory. It was called the WS1, which I think stands for Right Switch. And it was a very strange looking little thing. It had a knob on it and a couple of buttons, and I really don't know why they just didn't put it inside the CR-78 to begin with, but never mind, you had this separate accessory. The trouble is that Roland didn't make too many of this separate accessory, so not a lot of owners of a CR-78 were able to program their drum machines, which is a bit of a shame. However, we don't have that problem with Cherry Audio CR-78. They have built programming capability directly inside it, and it is so simple to use. Let's have a go at it now. Right, let's take a look at the programmer section here. You'll see that there's a switch called play mode. At the moment, it's set to preset, which means factory presets. And it gives us the ability to just choose these factory presets here. If we switch it to user, then the display changes, and now we get a 16-step sequencer. You can actually change it to 24 steps by flicking this switch here, the subdivision switch. So here we have quarter notes for each beat, and we have 4 beats to a bar, which is pretty standard stuff. But if we switch it to 6, now we have 24 steps in total and 6 subdivisions to each beat for that kind of triplet kind of feel. We'll leave it back at 4 for the time being, just to do some simple programming. Now we have the ability to program patterns and songs. I'll show you the songs in a minute, but first let's just do programming of patterns, and you select what you're programming with this switch here. At the moment it's set to pattern. there we can set it to song. So we'll leave it at pattern. We've got up to 99 patterns that we can program for the CR-78, and then we can save that as our own preset. So we've got 99 patterns in total. So I'm just going to leave this here at pattern number 1, and let's just do some programming. It's so simple. We choose the number of steps, the length of the pattern. So here it's a maximum of 16 steps. We choose the instrument that we want to record. So we've got these little abbreviations around the outside, and if you don't know what they are, Cherry Audio give us a nice description here. So let's just go with the bass drum and let's just whack in some notes. And it's just a question of just clicking on these little buttons here. Let me just play that to you. So let's add a snare drum. Hi-hats. Now we can also program in real time using this trigger button here. Now let me just turn the sequencer off for a second. When the sequencer is off, this trigger button is just going to give you a preview of the sound that you've selected, the instrument you've selected. So let's say select this one, and then it allows us to hear it. But when we are playing the sequencer, then this is a way of inputting in real time that particular instrument. Simple as that. It's so simple. It really is. It's a lot of fun to use, and you build up your patterns this way. So this is the first pattern I've got going. Let's switch to a new pattern. I'm going to make this really short. Let's go down to say 4 steps, and I'm just going to put in a bass drum. Just make it very different from the first pattern. Okay. Because now I'm going to show you how to build up a song. Now a song is just a sequence of patterns just put together. So let's switch to song mode. Now this display here, rather than being the number of steps, is the song step number. So for the first place, the first pattern that I'm going to have in my song, I just choose which one it's going to be. So I'm going to choose pattern number 1. Then I'll move to the next position in my song, and then I can choose, say, pattern number 2, and then the third position in my song. Well, let's use pattern number 1 again, and then go back to pattern number 2. So we've just got pattern 1, pattern 2, pattern 1, pattern 2. And then when I play it, it'll be quite short, but it sounds like this. And that's it. Building up songs, building up patterns is so simple. Now Cherry Audio have provided a bunch of little utilities to help us here. We've got a copy and paste and erase button. Copy allows us to copy the entire pattern across all the instruments, or just the currently selected instruments set of notes, and then paste allows us to paste a whole pattern, or paste just the instrument notes into the current pattern. And we've got the ability to erase, so we can erase just the notes for the current instrument, in other words the same as doing that, or we could erase the whole pattern, or we can erase all the patterns and just go back to sort of like a blank canvas again. So it's really simple, really straightforward to program the CR-78. Okay, a little bit of fun number 2. Guess this iconic song. Now actually I should have done this one first, because this is the oldest of the songs that I'm going to get you to guess. It's an incredibly iconic song. It was released on an album in 1978, so they must have just unboxed their CR-78 and gone, what are we going to make with this? Let's make this incredibly iconic song. I think it was released as a single in '79. It really was pop music getting into its stride in the very late 70s. An incredibly iconic band with an incredibly iconic singer. You will know this instantly. Now, you'll see down here that I've got the cha-cha-cha and the rumba both selected. Now, I read somewhere that it's not these two that actually is on this track. It is variant A, but I prefer variant B. I think it sounds a little bit more similar. I haven't been able to get it very, very close anyway, but I'm going to go with B. No copyright strikes, of course. I'm going to go with B. Now, you've got the ability to sort of like mute certain instruments or groups of instruments just with these 4 buttons on the front panel, but I'm ignoring those. I've gone into the main mixer because we've got complete control with this wonderful CR-78 from Cherry Audio, and what I've done is I've basically muted or controlled the volume of the different instruments here with this main mixer section at the bottom. I've also added a little bit of panning going on there for a little bit of a stereo feel, and I've added some reverb as well to some of the instruments. And I've played around with the EQ. I've done quite a bit to try and get it close to the original track. It's not that close, but it's pretty close. Anyway, I'm going to play it to you. You will instantly recognize what I'm talking about. It sounds like this. So that's what we get at the beginning of this incredibly iconic track, and then it just bursts into this incredibly rocky, poppy backing track, and this is my rather weak and not very good attempt at kind of giving you that feel of it like this. So that's what we've got now. No, I'm not going to attempt to sing it. Right, so now that we've covered the basics of the CR-78 as well as how to program it, let's look at the features that Cherry Audio have added to this instrument that really do take it sonically in territory that the original CR-78 could never reach. So I've mentioned already that this is not a sample-based drum machine here. We have got virtual analog emulation, which means that we can get at those virtual circuits and change the behavior of the sound. So let's have a look at that, and we're going to go and look in the voice edit panel mode. Now I've got a very, very simple user rhythm going on here, just a bass drum. Now let's go into this voice edit panel mode and look at the bass drum settings. Now these settings do vary depending on the instrument and depending on how that instrument sound is constructed. So as you can see, there's a lot of variation in terms of what these labels are for the different controls. Bass drum's got 4 different controls: pitch, decay, there's one affecting the click and the tone, as well as the brightness of the click. So we've got 2 tones going on here. We've got this little click as well as a more fundamental sound. And we can affect that fundamental sound by increasing the decay. And we can affect the brightness of the click. We've got overall control of the tone. And then for that fundamental booming sound, we can actually change its pitch. So we can come up with something that's really quite different to the original sound. A lot more snappier bass drum. Let's have a little play around with the snare drum. So I'm going to mute the bass, unmute the snare. Again, we've got 4 controls over pitch, decay, the color of the noise, as well as the click level. Let's just increase the decay so we can hear that noise, and this is controlling the color of it. Then you can hear that click there, that lower frequency click. We can accentuate it or remove it completely. and then we've got control over the pitch. In fact, we've got control over the pitch with most of these instruments. So we really can quite drastically change the properties of the sound of each of these instruments. And one way to really kind of showcase what you can do is to have a play around with the presets that Cherry Audio provide. There are some amazing presets here. I'm just going to just sort of dip into just a few of them in this category called Modern. Let's listen to this one here, Construction Time. It sounds like this. Choose another one, Pretty Machine. One more, Slow Grind. So you'll hear there, it's not only about changing the properties of the instrument sounds themselves, there's also a lot of effects going on here. And it's effects that I'll cover in the next section. Right, time to guess another iconic track. This one is from 1980, and with this particular artist, one of my favourite artists actually, this is my all-time favourite song from this particular artist. So it's 1980, it's yet another track that begins with a CR-78 rhythm, and it begins with a stock rhythm. It's the rumba on its own. That's what we get. This is what it sounds like. It's another instantly recognizable track. I just want to show you one thing while we're here, before we get into my interpretation of this track. So when I'm playing here, I'm just getting the DAW to play, and I've got Cherry Rhythm CR-78. I've got the host sync turned on, so it just starts playing. It starts playing the rhythm, and it starts playing at the tempo of my DAW, which is brilliant. To have full control over the volume of every single note that gets played, what you can do is you can use this little section here. See, it's called Drag-Export. Just hold over it and drag, and I can drop the MIDI into my DAW. If I double click on it so you can see it, move this out of the way, there you go. There are all the MIDI notes spread across, playing each of the individual instruments in the CR-78. Now once you do that, what you need to do is turn host sync off, otherwise you're going to be playing it twice. You're going to be playing the notes internally as well as via the DAW. So now I can just play it. It's exactly the same as I had before, but I've got full control, so I could play around with the velocities of every note, something like that, for example, and then play that. And I'm just going to now drag that all the way across my wonderful interpretation of this incredibly iconic song. I absolutely love this song. Let's hear what it sounds like. Well, it's my interpretation of Roxy music. So with the original Roland CR-78, the main way that you had to change the characteristics of the sounds of each of the instruments was to apply external effects to them. And this is something that you can do with Cherry Audio's CR-78 too. Now if you're running it inside a DAW, then you get two options available to you when you add it into your DAW as an instrument track. Now I'm running Steinberg Cubase version 13, so I'll show you what it looks like in my DAW, but in your DAW it's likely to be a similar process but look different. So if I was to add a new track in Cubase, this is what I get. And in this little drop down, you'll see that under the Cherry Audio folder I've got the CR-78, but I've also got an option for a CR-78 multi-out. Now I've got one of those already loaded, and I'll show you again in Cubase what it looks like. So it's this one here, and the difference between these two options is that I have got now multiple outputs coming from the instrument that are exposed to the DAW. So you'll see I've got all of the instruments, the stereo audio outputs of each of the instruments available to me, and what I can do in Cubase is I can choose specifically which ones I want to bring into Cubase so that I can then record them individually and set effects on them individually. So that's something that you can do when you're running CR-78 inside your DAW. Let me now switch back to the regular version. Now obviously if you don't want to do that, then Cherry Audio have provided us with a set of effects like they do with all of their instruments, and we've got a really amazing array of effects that we can use. So they're available here in this effects mixer panel mode, which I'll switch to now. I kind of gave you a little bit of a brief look at it before, but we'll go through it in a bit more detail. Now, before we actually get onto the effects, let's talk about the mixer section. It's really very fundamental, and I find myself using it all the time as I'm creating my own presets, because you've got individual control to the levels of each of the instruments inside the drum machine. If I switch back very briefly to the main panel, we can mute individual instruments or groups of instruments here in this cancel voice section, and that's really kind of a live performance thing to sort of like bring instruments in and out, but I tend to not use that. I tend to use these controls here, which give you complete control, not just about muting an instrument, but actually about setting the level of it. Then we can actually mute and solo inside here as well, and we have got control over stereo placement, so we can create a nice stereo mix of our instruments in the drum machine. Obviously you've got a master volume control here. Now these sets of buttons here, these little buttons are relating to sending individual instruments to the effects that we've got up here, and as you can see they're color coded with these different colors, and we've got the different effects across the top. We've got an overdrive circuit, flanger, a delay, and a reverb, and some of these effects have got multiple algorithms. So with the reverb we've got spring, room plate, and a kind of a galactic sort of like sound. The delay, we've got digital delay, tape delay, ping pong delay, and the overdrive we've got tube and fuzz emulations. And so these are effects which you set up, and then you can determine which instruments you want to send to those effects. Finally, over here on the right hand side we've got some global effects. We've got a global compressor for the whole mix, and we've got a 6-band EQ as well. Now, some of these effects are certainly, the overdrive can really change the quality of the sound, and I just want to showcase one of the presets that comes with the Cherry Audio collection, because it really does sort of like show off the use of overdrive. Because when I go back to the voice edit mode here, an awful lot of the instruments allow you to have the pitch changed. So what you can do is you can go into here, you can sort of like very finely select and tune the pitch of the instruments how you want to, and then when you apply overdrive, you're accentuating the sound and actually turning the drum machine into a melodic sound generator. Let me show you an example. There's actually a whole category of presets that Cherry Audio have provided called the melodic category. I'm just going to choose this one particular one, pick out one out of the many brilliant ones we have here. It's called 80s Reflection number 2. I'm loading that in there, and let's just listen to it. So that melodic sound, those tuned percussive sounds, are achieved by editing the pitches, specifically of these three instruments down here, the two bongos and the conga. So what I'll do is I'll go in here and just sort of eliminate all the other sounds. just those three that are giving us that sound. And it's there because of the overdrive. If I've turned the overdrive off, actually that sounds pretty good too, doesn't it? But it's the overdrive that's accentuating those frequencies and giving us basically what sounds like a synthesizer. Right, time to guess another iconic song that uses the CR-78, and I think I have saved the most iconic of them all until last. This one's going to be really, really easy for you. 1981, January, I believe, just right at the beginning of 1981, this song was released on an album by an artist, and it's so well known and it's so iconic that I do wonder whether that artist owns the rights to this particular preset on the Roland CR-78. It's this one here, and when I discovered which one it was, it made me laugh because it's called Disco Number 2, which I really wouldn't have thought was right for this particular song. Anyway, when I play it, you're going to know exactly what it is. Now, like normal, I've gone into the mixer section. You'll see there that I've been playing around with the levels of the individual instruments. I've been playing around with the panning as well, give it a little bit of a wider stereo kind of feel. I've added reverb to everything, just a very gentle reverb because this is a very gentle preset. And I've added a little bit of compression as well. That's really all I've done to it. Let's listen to it. There you go. Instantly recognizable, isn't it? Now, it's not exactly the same as on the song, so I'm wondering whether a little tiny bit of programming went on or what. I'm not quite sure. I was playing around with it. I was trying to see if bringing things in and out would make it sound exactly the same. It doesn't sound exactly the same, but it's close enough. It's clearly recognizable, isn't it? So I will torture you in a minute with my interpretation of this incredibly famous track. Obviously, I made it a lot different on purpose and not as good on purpose. I don't want to show the guy up, do I? But I might as well give you just a few final thoughts and play you out with this particular little piece that I've put together here. Final thoughts about the CR-78. I mean, I've had absolutely tons and tons of fun with this particular plugin. I didn't think I was going to enjoy it as much as I have. I'm not making it up. This is the most fun I've had with any plugin I've ever played with. It's absolutely a load of fun, and I think that's for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's a trip down memory lane, isn't it? There's a lot of nostalgia involved, going back to the late 70s, early 80s, where really, pop music and electronic music was really blossoming and turning into something incredible at that kind of time, at that era. And that's where the Roland CR-78 sat in terms of when it was released. Now, a lot of people, when I read about this particular drum machine, a lot of people attribute its success to the fact that it was one of the first ever programmable drum machines. But I'm not so sure about that, because at the end of the day, the particular iconic songs that I've chosen for this video and other ones that I've come across, there's no programming going on in them at all, or hardly any programming. They really are just using the basic presets, which by today's standards are quite cheesy. And it's because they're quite cheesy that I didn't know how much fun I was going to have with this drum machine, but actually I've had tons, because what I've really learned is that you can start with something so simple like this little Disco Number 2 preset, and then just let your creativity go, just try things out, build upon it, and build tracks and build songs. And that's what artists did back in the late 70s into the early 80s with the equipment that they had, with the basic sounds that they had. It was really a way for them to express themselves and be creative, and that's for me where all the fun is. And I really do urge you to try out the Cherry Rhythm CR-78 for yourself, and just see if it can really be that sort of like creative injection into your music making. So that's it for me. I've really enjoyed my time here playing with this little instrument. Let me play you out with what I've got going on here. It doesn't sound anything like the original. It doesn't do it justice at all, but it's my way of just being a little bit creative and taking this rhythm to the next stage.